if we could save our questions to the end, I have a lot of slides to go through, and we need to do this in 45 minutes time to get you back to work or whatever else. But my first slide, I just couldn't resist this picture. These cute kids, and they're sitting on a raised bed, and they look so happy, and they're so content, and whatever else. So, you know, we do have some of our younger families here grow these vegetables and get our children to be able to dig in the dirt. So I thought it was a great slide. So what are we going to talk about today? There's a lot of interest in small space gardening. As we all age or whatever else, we don't have as much garden space. A lot of us are living in housing areas that we don't have a garden. So what can you do to accommodate that small space? So we're going to talk about square foot gardening, succession planning, and inner planning. Some really new, they've been around for a while of course, but they're being looked at more and more by home gardeners. Then talking about integrated pest management, or IPM, for organic gardeners. If you're wanting to shy away from some of the synthetic pesticides that are used to control insects and diseases, I'm going to give you a few tips on that. And some weeding strategies. We all know that weeds are just, you know, bad or whatever else. And I've seen a statistic back, and I've shared this many times, when the economy crashed, they figured there were about 12 million new gardeners the next year because a lot of them wanted to raise their own food, help with some of the dollars they were spending on gas or whatever else. Well, they said there were 12 million. The next year they said there were 6 million less. And the reason was because of the weeds. They just got burned out. So I'll give you some strategies to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about some of the warm season crops that we can grow in our area. What I'd like to share with you, just to move from the Minnesota Grown Directory, and there's some copies up here, there's some copies back there, some statistics on how you as a home gardener are trying to grow your own vegetables, but there are other people out there that are trying to, you know, accommodate your interests and whatnot. So it's called Minnesota Grown, and there are they track all this, how many farmers and there are throughout the United States. And so over the past 10 years, the number of local food growers has surged 52%. There are now 1,300, you know, local food growers. So this local foods initiative and knowing where our food comes from and being 2,000 miles fresher is a big hit, and it's moving forward. Minnesota farmers markets have nearly tripled. There's 182 farmers markets now in the state of Minnesota. There's winter farmers markets, which is really unique, growing these greens and whatnot during the winter months. Some of the work with winter greenhouses and growing these greens. There are 26. And the wine industry, the vineyards and whatever else, there are now 600 vineyards, and they add $59 million to the economy in Minnesota, which is huge. And CSAs, they're called, community-sponsored agricultural groups, there's been a 9-fold increase in the number of those in the last 10 years. So more and more people wanting to grow food for us. Okay, we'll get into square foot gardening. And what is this all about? And you can see by the picture there that this is approximately a square foot, and many different types of vegetables grow in there. But it's based on that wide rows are a waste of space, okay? And vegetables can be grown in less space and grown satisfactorily, okay? Many of us have large gardens, and we have 3-4 feet or whatever in between rows, and we have to till the rows and keep the weeds down. But this is making use of less space. So the big advantage is you never have to walk on the bed to access the plants, okay? You can reach in from multiple sides to weed or harvest or plant, okay? There's no rows, okay? You can access from the side, not the middle, okay? And you're not walking on this, so you're avoiding compaction. So hopefully your plants will stay healthy, even with tighter garden spacing. And Dr. Dal Murkowski, who has done a lot of work with soil compaction on the agronomic crops, was a retired scientist from the USDA Soils Lab here. If you're interested, check out this site. I mean, unbelievable what this man has done in how compaction has, you know, with agricultural crops. When you're driving across agricultural land that is many, many thousands of tons of farm equipment, that does a lot with the soil. And so with square foot gardening, we're eliminating some of that compaction. Another thing with square foot gardening is things to consider when you're doing these types of gardening is with any type of garden there's a special place to plant your garden. So be critical of that space where you're going to grow. Square foot gardening method uses a box to contain the soil. This shows a picture of a box. It can be built on any landscape, and it requires very little space. Supposedly 80% less than conventional gardening, which really, narrows down the space that you can use to garden. And if you do have a bad back and bending over bothers you, well then just build it like this so you can have it on legs, and that will work for you there. Best garden location. Garden location, this will work with not just square foot gardening, but anybody's garden. Find a place that's convenient in your home landscape. I think it's really important to see your garden from your home. Others might live in town and they have their garden out at the farm place or whatever else. You're not really there and you can't really visualize it. So you want to be able to see it from your home window. To some people, seeing it reminds them to go relax. Some people might think, oh, I got to go work in my garden again. But some people, that it is a relaxer, it is a stress reliever, You need a minimum of 4 hours of sunlight a day to carry on any type of garden. Stay clear of trees and shrubs, which their roots will, suck the nutrition out of the soil, take some of your moisture away, and of course shade some of those, because you need a lot of sun. And locate it close to a water source. You don't want to have to be dragging hoses all over the place and create more work, so make sure, again, it's close to a water source. So here's some of the layout and the box design. You can make these almost any size that's convenient, but a 3x3 or a 3x8 is a real nice size to start with. With 3 feet, you can reach in, you can plant, and you can weed easily with being at 3 feet. A 2 foot by 2 foot is a nice size if you're wanting to grow some of these vegetables in a patio. 3 foot by 3 foot is recommended for if you're going to use children. And but the most important thing is don't make it too wide, because again, you do not want to walk on there. And again, just, avoid walking on the soil. Building materials needed, okay? Boxes are needed to hold the soil in place above the ground. And with this one, it's like probably, those are about 2 by 6 or whatever. So it's probably about, 6, 12, 18 inches off the ground, maybe a little less. But you have more sides, okay? You have exposed sides, which the heat, the sunlight will warm up your soil faster than when you're growing in a standard garden. So we've done some research on raised beds with strawberries and other things, so it just helps to have a raised bed to it'll drain water faster, and it will just create more heat since you have more sides where the heat and the sunlight will hit. The boxes can be built by you. You can just get standard lumber. There are kits you can order to make this square foot garden. But if you have more than one box, make sure there's a minimum space of 32 inches so it's accessible for wheelchairs if needed. And a square foot garden doesn't need to be filled with the top with soil. Just remember this, if it's higher the size, the more soil you will need to fill it. So beware of that. So a very important thing with square foot gardening and creating and growing in a box like this is the soil is the foundation for square foot gardening. It's very important. You don't want to take any shortcuts or you might be disappointed. If you just fill up your box with black soil, possibly that black soil is going to turn very hard into concrete. It shrinks away from the edges where some of the water is going to drain off and whatnot. So square foot gardening was created many years ago by a person by the name of Mel Bartholomew and doing some of this research. He's made some books and whatever else that go into more detail about this subject. But his recommendation is 1/3 compost, 1/3 peat moss, and 1/3 vermiculite. It's just recommended soil mix to grow these plants satisfactorily in a box. It's very important with this too to make sure these materials come in a bag or a bale or whatever, and they need to be pre-moistened before you plant anything. They require a lot of moisture. Okay, again, we talked about wood. They can be made from any material. They come in many different sizes, but the recommendation is never use a wood thicker than 2 inch. And garden walls or sides can be built by, a 2x4, 2x6, and so on. Okay, getting to what vegetables you would like to grow in a square foot garden. As it says, almost any common garden vegetable can be grown in this system. You need to experiment for yourself. I could talk a whole other session on just what vegetables should be grown in here, but the most important thing is to, whatever you're thinking of growing, look at the seed packet itself. That gives you the proper plant spacing, a lot of directions. It's amazing the information that's back on the back side of a seed packet. It tells you a lot, and they just didn't put it on there for fun. It's very important stuff, and they've done some of that research that's important for you to be a successful grower. So look at the seed packet in order to determine what you want to grow. While we're talking about in between time here, there's water. Okay, water is very important. And we use a lot of drip irrigation out here, and there are now kits available for home gardeners to buy drip irrigation. But what it is the tube that has an emitter every, say, 8 to 12 inches on there, and it will emit water at the roots, where it's very important. Of course, you can have a sprinkler or whatever else and wave that sprinkler over the top of it, but you know there's a lot of evaporation with a sprinkler. This is just, as we talk about this subject being environmental and conserving and whatever else, this is a good method to conserve water. But you need special backflow preventers, pressure regulators, and filters and whatnot, so beware of those things that are in your handout there to follow in order to put in a drip irrigation system. So it's a very efficient way of watering any type of crops in any type of garden. Succession planting, this is the next thing we're going to talk about. It's a way to extend your harvest by staggering plantings of different crops and planting varieties with different mature dates. Okay? A good succession plan means you will have fresh fruit from spring until fall. Okay? You know, don't plant 24 broccoli plants all on May 1st and then they're all ready at the same time. You know, this method just spreads things out. We'll talk a little bit about that. But you need to do a little bit of homework with the succession plan. You need to plan on what you want to grow and when you want to plant. Okay? And so you need to also understand those individual growth habits and preferences of those particular vegetables that you're interested in growing. Again, a lot of that information is on the back of the seed packet. So what we're going to do with the succession planting is we're going to sow small amounts of seed at regular intervals. It's interesting here are some boxes with some type of leafy greens where these were started first. This is started second, probably about maybe a week to 10 days later, and then later. So here, you're going to be able to harvest their grains over many different weeks. And they'll probably, maybe, you can do that again and again. Some of the crops that you continually see, like for instance radishes or whatever, they don't like the heat, so they're not necessarily going to do real well during the summer heat. But just a succession of planting. And so you have a consistent supply of food all season long. Also, another method, just to give an example, is if you're planting sweet corn. There are varieties of sweet corn that you could plant all at the same time, but then one variety is mature in 65 days, the next one might be mature in 75 days, and the next one might be mature in 85 days. So you can plant them all at the same time, but they have different dates that you're supposedly going to be able to harvest them. So that's another method to succession planting. Again, I can't emphasize enough to look at those catalog descriptions and those seed packets for the vital statistics on each one of these vegetables. Here this is a brassica or a cabbage or broccoli they've planted. This one is going to be ready shortly. This one was planted sometime afterwards, and it looked like they saved some room here to put in another row. Again, so you're not harvesting your broccoli all at the same time. Another method, make sure, and we were talking about this earlier with some of the people that were here, avoid the diseases and pests. If you're growing in a limited area, make sure you map out what you've planted in each part of that area each year, so you avoid some disease issues, okay? Especially with tomatoes. Their cousins, like peppers, eggplants, potatoes, don't keep planting those into the same area year after year. Avoid planting those plants into the same area and avoid it for 3 years so you don't get some of these disease issues. The same holds true for some of the brassicas, which are the broccolis, the cabbage, and cauliflower and whatnot. Avoid planting those in those areas continually in the same area. But again, what they've done here with succession planting, they're just here. These were planted just a very short time ago, and again and again and again and again. So you just have a continual supply of greens. Interplanting. This is another method of being successful with some of your vegetables. As you can see on this right here, they're growing their onions, and they're growing these leaf lettuce right in between the rows of lettuce. This is as I make my way through this is a real interesting way of growing some vegetables. It has some real pluses. You can pair plants again with different maturity rates. It mentions here kale and lettuce work particularly well together because lettuce has matured real early, and the kale will grow big enough to shade or crowd them out later. Multiple crops in the same garden space. That's the emphasis here. This was an unbelievable picture that I found. There's a lady harvesting out there where she's doing some interplanting, where she's growing some of the same vegetables down this slight incline or whatever else. She's got some marigolds planted here to hopefully maybe repel some insects or whatever. But she's got a continual planting of onions and some brassica crops and whatnot, and just continual planting. But short season vegetables like lettuce and spinach, they can be interplanted between main crop vegetables like peppers and tomatoes that take a much longer season to produce any fruit. The main crop plants should be planted at their normal plant spacing. Like for instance, the peppers are 18 inches apart, tomatoes are 3 foot apart. But then the short season vegetables are planted in between or whatever. They're tapping into a different part of the soil and are harvested before they're competing with the main crop plants. So again, you're using up all that space in there. But here's the most interesting part that I really found with interplanting. There's some real pluses with this. Again, we talked about those leafy greens growing very rapidly, and they fill the spaces between the main crop plant. They'll shade out weeds, okay? I think that's a real plus. We talked about weeds before, how much they take up our time. And also, when you have these plants that are planted so close, placing interplanting, they'll protect the soil from drying out. And when you get a pounding rain, it's not splashing all that rain on the other plants. It's there's a blanket across the entire soil area. But the most interesting thing is they're going to form a low canopy that holds carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is when you grow plants, it's released from the soil. Well, with these plants in there, it's enhancing the growth of the main crop plants. I looked this up, and I found a lot of research articles, a lot of science behind this, and proof that this really does happen. So you might notice with using this system, interplanting or whatever, where you're growing these plants real close, that carbon dioxide that's released is going to benefit your main crop plants. You're hopefully going to see better quality and better growth on your plants because of the system. Also, insects are kind of smart. They know where to go, They have a sense for what the particular plants are. But when you have these plants that are interplanted and real close together, it kind of messes them up. And it breaks up their visual and chemical signatures, they call them, of the main crop plants, making it more difficult for the garden pest to figure out what's what. So again, insects are smart, they know what to do. This is kind of just messing up what they're trying to do. Mentioned radishes before. Again, they're fast growing. They can be grown in between chard. They're ready in 20 to 30 days, the radishes, before the chard begins to mature. And another point is to interplant crops with different growing habits. You got tall crops, you got short ones, you got deep rooted with shallow rooted. So remember that when you're planting these together. Got to do a little homework. This is a tomato root. When you're interplanting some of the benefits. I mean, consider growth rate, again, when above and below ground when you're interplanting vegetables. Crops that root deeply, such as parsnips and carrots and tomatoes, can be intercropped with shallow-rooted vegetables such as broccoli, lettuce, and potatoes. So be thinking about that. Again, do some of your homework because tomato roots can go very deep. Normal is about 1 foot, but they will go up to 2 feet. So remember that type of, and do some homework on that before you mix up these crops. Okay, interplanting. Okay, there's also the Native American, which has been used for a long time. The Three Sisters Garden, maybe many of you read stories about this, but the use of corn, beans, and squash growing together. They work very well. because the beans add nitrogen to the soil, and that nitrogen that is needed for those nitrogen-rich corn and squash benefits those plants so they're easier to grow. I'll talk a little bit more about that and the concept behind that thought. But another type of garden, a Three Sisters garden with those three crops being grown together. So nitrogen-fixing plants. There are many plants in the legume family, such as peas, beans, vetch, and clover, that grow in cooperation with soil-dwelling bacteria. Okay? The bacteria, what they do is they live on the nodules on the roots of these legume plants. Okay? Then the interesting science behind this is they take nitrogen gas from the air and they convert it to a form plants can use. And then legume dies and the roots begin to decompose, and then when this happens, the nitrogen, which these heavy feeding crops, such as corn and whatnot, which they need, becomes available to other plants. But first of all, you have to till them into the ground. Okay? So, nitrogen-fixing plants. So, an interesting concept to use when you're doing some of these gardens, so you can add nitrogen to your soil without using any commercial synthetic fertilizer. Okay? And if more and more of us are concerned about the use of commercial fertilizers or whatever, here's a method where we can add nitrogen to the soil through plants. We're doing a real interesting study with this right now over in our high tunnel. We're growing peppers in our high tunnel. What we're trying to do is there are these winter cover crops, they call it, which will survive outside. Normally when you get a little bit of snow cover, such as vetch and rye and things like that. We're trying to grow them in a high tunnel, okay? In the high tunnel, you don't normally get the snow, unless the snow blows in from the side. We're keeping the sides down on our high tunnel. And we planted these winter cover crops in September in the high tunnel. They grew, and they still are green at this time right now, okay? We hope they will overwinter for us. This is a 3-year project. That's working with a faculty professor out of St. Paul. The problem with a lot of people that are growing in high tunnels is they're adding compost and they're adding manures, okay, which are beneficial to the soil. But what they do is they up the phosphorus levels off the chart when you do a soil test. Phosphorus levels are very high with adding compost and manures to soils, okay, if you continually use them. If we grow these winter cover crops and they can survive in this situation, what we're planning to do is just knock them down in the spring before we plant our peppers, incorporate them into the soil, and hopefully, again, some of these are nitrogen fixing. We're going to add some beneficial nitrogen to the soil and natural organic matter, humus, and whatever else. But here, we grew a plant during the winter to provide extra nutrition for these plants in the spring. Amazing if this all works. We'll see. We'll be looking at it for a couple more years. Okay, integrated pest management. IPM is a short word for this. What is it? It's a practice for controlling of pests. It's a natural method, okay? For many years and whatever, commercial producers, maybe yourself or whatever, when it was June 1st, I need to go out and spray this insecticide on my strawberries, okay? This type of method, you're monitoring the insect activity so you know when to spray, okay? And then when commercial producers, when they go out there and they might find a certain percent of insects, maybe it hasn't reached its threshold level yet. There's only so many aphids per square foot, okay? We know they're there, but they haven't reached a level where they're going to really cause damage to the crop. So you're monitoring these insects through integrated pest management. We're just, again, the concern about the use of pesticides, spraying more than we have to, we're minimizing the use of any type of pesticides for benefit of human health and our environment. Okay, IPM. As we're talking about organic production, many of these products that organic gardeners have available have not been extensively tested. I mean, there's a lot of them that are new in the market, a lot of them that are being developed, and current research has not been summarized or made widely available. In other words, we just don't know if they all work, these organic chemicals. Here's a method to the madness that we use. We have a low tunnel, day-neutral strawberry project. And there's this new Asian fruit fly called the spotted winged Drosophila. It's just arrived within the last 3 years. It is detrimental to fruit that is harvested in the fall. And we're harvesting these strawberries in summer and in the fall. It's especially detrimental to fall raspberries, okay? And it's found throughout the nation. But what we do is we monitor for that, and so we know if we have any by these tracks here. This is a concoction of a very stinky material made of apple cider and flour and whatever else. It really stinks. And then there's holes drilled in the sides of this trap cup where that Asian fruit fly, the spotted winged drosophila, can go into. They like this, and then they stick to these yellow traps right there. And as you can see on this one right here, it's catching all kinds of bugs and flies and whatever else, okay? This is the new one that they're going to put up, hanging in a shaded area along the fence line in this planting. So then, a lot of these traps are being used for home gardeners and commercial producers, so they can monitor the activity of certain insects, and when they find them, then spray, okay? Not until then. So, again, different methods to use to just monitor for these things. They're just monitoring for them. They're not going to take care of the problem. You need to spray after that if they reach a certain level. So this is something interesting we're doing we haven't done it for the last 3 years. Okay, let's get into some specific insects that maybe many of you have problems with. Here's cutworms. All of you have probably at one time had an issue with cutworms on your vegetables. So cutworms, we'll just talk about, you know, what they're doing to onions, okay? The larvae are approximately from a dozen different species of night-flying moths, okay? So there's a lot of moths out there flying at night, so there can be possibly a lot of cutworms. Most species overwinter as a partially grown larva that become active early in the spring on young onions, just to use for an example. They hide in soil during the day and they crawl on the surface at night, okay? And then they feed and cut off young seedlings at the soil surface, so they can be detrimental. How many have had problems with cutworms before? Okay, there's a number of hands, okay? So I'm just kind of mention some of the methods to hopefully help you control this. Most species lay their eggs in vegetation in the late summer or fall, so keeping your fields clean of weeds and crops in the fall really helps, okay? Fall tillage is very important. So if you have a garden, make sure you get in the fall tillage to expose this larva to birds, okay? A method of organically trying to take care of some of these cutworms. Another method is to delay the seeding of anything you're putting in your garden if you've had a problem with cutworms. You want to cultivate the fields after the weeds are growing and whatnot, and that can starve the cutworms for a while before the onions are planted. So again, delaying your planting, let the weeds come up a little bit, and hopefully you might starve off those cutworms. There are some baits available, spinosad and BT. BT is a chemical called Bacillus thuringiensis. It's been around for a long time. What it does, it's an organic chemical. You feed it to your particular insect, and what it does, it paralyzes its gut so it starves to death. That's how it works. Sounds painful, but it's a method of killing these cutworms. It is a little tough with some of these insecticides, getting a pest aphids in your garden. There are many different types of aphids. We'll just concentrate on this cabbage aphid. Again, aphids, they suck plant sap. It can cause this leaf distortion and the poor growth. On cabbage, they're really difficult to control once they enter all those sheltered parts of the cabbage plant. They can also transmit some viruses, which render some cabbage unfit for human consumption. So they can spread a lot of problems. So what you need to do, if you've had problems with aphids on any of your crops, just scout them once or twice a week. And there are insecticidal soaps to spray if aphids are found. This is an organic method of controlling this particular insect. Make sure. The reason you want to scout once or twice a week is because you need to make contact with the insect with this insecticidal soap. With some of the systemic type insecticides, which have some systemic action, they'll go through the plant. You can just spray, and when the bug chews on it, it will kill it. But with insecticidal soap, you need to make contact with the insect. So just make sure you apply to all parts of the plant where you think that aphid might be. And you need to, repeat applications numerous times to control by this method. Cabbage looper is another common insect that is common in the Nebraskas, the broccolis and the cabbage and whatever. It's really gross when you cook your broccoli and you steam it or whatever, or boil it, and these bugs come floating to the top. So not very appetizing. But they're a pest every year. They're generally here all the time. Overwinter in crop debris, fence rows, and weedy fields. I've talked about making sure the weeds are controlled. Keep your fence rows or your wet fence areas clean of weeds. During the day, the white butterflies that you see commonly flying around, they're feeding on nectar, but they're also moving from plant to plant laying eggs. So when you see these moths flying around, it's a good warning that you might going to have some later problems. So be aware of that. Cabbage looper, as you can see in the picture, this has been just devastated by the looper chewing on the cabbage. One method is when you do purchase your cabbage plants, if you do purchase them from the nursery, make sure they're clean, just inspect them. Again, can't emphasize enough, weed control in your garden is important. They can build up to very high levels in weedy areas. And after harvest, just don't let all your crop debris sit in the field. Make sure you work it back into the soil to destroy the larvae and pupa that could lead to higher populations later that season or the next year. Again, good, clean practices can control a lot of these issues with insects. Now we'll talk about some weeding strategies. As you can see, this is, well, a good weeding strategy is to use a hoe. Okay. Well, the best management strategy is to not let weeds get introduced in your garden by different means. You can't let them go to seed. There are other methods of weeds coming into your garden from compost, manures, straw mulch, equipment, contaminants and seed, and transplant containers. So they can come in by many different methods. Practices that minimize weed seed production is make sure you till or mow after crop harvest, but before the weeds go to seed. Don't let them go to seed. And then one other thing is identify these weeds prior to tillage. Because some of the perennial species, such as quackgrass and Canadian thistle, they have those underground rhizomes. If you till them under, you're just going to spread them around. So the best method to that madness is those perennial weeds. If you want to control them, you can use a herbicide called Roundup, but make sure you apply it in the fall, okay? Spring is not the best time to apply that particular herbicide. The weeds are building up food reserves in the fall, and if you spray Roundup at that time, they'll take that herbicide deeper into their root system and likely do a much, much better job of killing that particular perennial weed. Here's an interesting study that was done. One of them was in Nebraska, but just how to eliminate some of these weed seeds. If you're using some manure and some compost, you need to compost them. Here's a study that was done putting the compost in a windrow, and the temperatures were 130 to 150 degrees. It really does heat up underneath these compost piles. After 2 weeks, we looked at this compost, and it killed 100% of the green foxtail, pennycress, and pineapple weed, and all but 3.5% of the redwood pigweed, which we so commonly have in our garden. And with that method, no weed seed survived after 4 weeks of composting. So they took care of it. They smoked it. Here's another trial that was very interesting. It talks about weed seeds and how long they live in the soil. So there were 41 weed species that were buried for 17 years in Nebraska. Okay? This study examined the long-term survival of those weed seeds. And, as I keep preaching, reveals the importance of preventing weeds from becoming established. Okay? Weed seeds were dug up on an annual basis to see if they would germinate. Following 17 years without tillage, 4 to 95% of those weeds germinated, So they're there forever, almost. So again, prevent the weeds from becoming established because they're going to stay in the soil. And there's certain weed seeds that last longer than others. So techniques for depleting the weed seeds, if you try this method, till your seed bed, prepare it for crop planting, do a tillage. Tillage actually stimulates germination of weed seeds. Allow that to rest while the non-dormant weeds germinate and emerge. So we know we're going to get a flush of weeds there. Okay? So your crop planting is delayed a little bit. Don't plant right away. Let those weeds come about and germinate. And hopefully you can exhaust some of the weed seeds that are on the upper soil surface. And then shortly before planting these emerge weeds, there's a method using a flame torch. There are torches you can buy, a little backpack that has a little propane tank on your back with a torch to smoke these weeds, or else use a very shallow cultivation. You don't want to till again and bring up new weed seed. Then your crop is then transplanted and direct seeded into that tillage without working the ground again. And it's particularly useful with small seeded or slow growing crops such as onions and carrots. So a method to the madness to hopefully rid yourself of some of these weeds by not doing additional tilling. Here's a method we've used on some organic ground solarization technique using the sheets of clear plastic. We've gone into an area where there was brome grass and quackgrass growing in this area for as long as I've been there. And we put some plastic over the top of it. We left it on for almost the entire season. This is a method that works best more so south of here, you know, where it stays warmer and they have more sunlight, more sunshine, and more heat. But it is an effective method to rid yourself of some of these weeds by just burning them up underneath the soil. Make sure you use moist soil. It does conduct the heat better than dry soil. So if you do this, make sure there's adequate moisture in these areas before you lay the plastic over it. It takes a minimum of 4 weeks to effective control of weeds near the soil surface. But what we've done is we've just left it on there ourselves for, you know, some of these perennial weeds for probably about 3 months, and it's done a fairly good job of eliminating those weeds. There's also, you know, weed suppression with natural mulches. You know, some of the wood chips and pine needles and yard waste, leaf debris and straw. Using those to help you rid yourself of some weeds. Just the only concern is, you know, can serve as a source of disease, and rodents and insects like that natural mulches to live in. So be aware of that. That could be one of the concerns. Growing cover crops. Cover crops are nice where we can sow them thickly to form a living mulch, let them grow. Some of the best types of cover crops are vetch, clover, beans, peas. I talked about some of those that are nitrogen-fixing crops. Let them grow. What you can do is as soon as you can, one method is to plant them in the very early season. If you can get in the ground in April, early May, plant it and turn under it, and then plant your warm season crops in there. Again, you're adding some beneficial organic matter, some humus, some nitrogen, which we talked about earlier. Or else what you can do is after early maturing vegetables and then harvest it, plant a cover crop. And it just keeps the weeds under control and a natural way to incorporate some good organic matter into your soil. Growing cover crops. Again, we've talked about this. Those types of particular crops we have that soil-dwelling bacteria we talked about. That bacteria lives in the nodules and the roots of the legumes. And again, the whole process of taking nitrogen gas from the air and converting it to a form that the plants can use is amazing, and how we can work that and benefit our plants. Plastic mulch is another method. We're growing tomatoes on clear plastic, and it's been shown that this red plastic works very well with tomato transplant. Again, helping in rid yourself of some of these weed issues, but and using what we've done with this system, you have that drip tape or drip tube underneath that plastic, which a lot of those plants. The only problem is you get a real nice flush of weeds right where that hole is, okay? But otherwise the plastic mulch keeps it under control. Many advantages and disadvantages to plastic mulch, but we've got some increased soil temperature, reduces some of the soil compaction, so this goes on and on of all the benefits that we have. The big thing is, you know, getting rid of this plastic, where you got to put it in your dumpster or take it to the landfill at the end of the season. There's many commercial producers, like out in California, where there are 60,000 acres of strawberries and all of them are under plastic, okay? What do they do with that? And they've tried methods to, you know, take care of it and reuse it, and but most of it all ends up in the landfill, so it's very unfortunate every year. Okay, now we'll go into some specific crops. The last 5 minutes, growing watermelons, cantaloupes, and honeydews. The big thing that's needed to grow these great watermelon is a hot, sunny location, fertile, well-drained soils, bees, and water. Okay, how many have grown watermelons, cantaloupe, honeydew before? Okay, number of you, great. Try it. Okay, okay. Well, you can either direct sow or plant transplants. Okay, either or. Okay. Transplanting is a big benefit. You can add about 2 to 4 weeks to the growing season. The thing with putting in a transplant, you just got to get it at just the right stage. If the plant is too big and you get a windy day, it just kind of chops it right off, okay? So make sure you've got a nice transplant, but it's not too big that the wind's going to wave it around and you just rip it off. They're kind of sensitive to root disturbance when you plant them. So be very careful how you handle these plants. They're really handling them delicately when you plant them. And of course, our famous honeybee, which we're all concerned about, they must pollinate the yellow watermelon blossom to get fruit. Melon seeds germinate best between 70 and 90 degrees, which is a very high temperature. You don't want to plant these, so what it says is, May 20th is the average planting date in Minnesota. If you plant in cool soil conditions, you might have some other problems that you get stung and bring on some other root diseases. Look at your package again. There's short season types that ripen between 65 and 75 days. There's other ones that are close to 85. When you're pushing that 85 days with a watermelon, you need really, really nice conditions in the fall, in the late fall, to grow and ripen these watermelons. Not every year is going to, work real great with some of these crops because they do need special conditions when they are ripening. This gives you some of the directions on what to properly plant. I've got this picture, it just kind of made my mouth water seeing these watermelons. They were so delicious. But one trick is to determine ripeness from watermelons. And when the watermelon, you think it's getting close, there's this pale or buttery yellow spot on the bottom. Or one method that I was taught by our former horticulturist here, Wes Gray, was to thump your shoe with your thumb, with this, Thump your leather boot, your leather shoe, and that sound should replicate what a ripe watermelon sounds like, okay? My wife can't believe it when I'm thumping, watermelon, whatever else, in the grocery store or whatever else, To me, it's a very reliable method, okay? Another method is, what you can do if you think it's getting close, cut out a triangle-shaped piece, in the rind there, pull it out, eat it, and if it tastes right, it's ready to go. If it's not, stick it back in there, okay? But melon's quality is a function of the sugar content of the fruit, and sugar content is achieved by avoiding stress. So, and this is really, as one person said, it's kind of a trick to grow these particular plants during our season in Minnesota. Cantaloupe Muskmelon, these two words, you hear them pronounced just like, they're interchangeable. They pretty much are the same plant, but there is a slight technical difference. The one thing with harvesting these two, there's a little method to the madness. When the surface netting gets rough, when the background color turns from green to yellow, it's a sign that it's getting ripe. The tendrils, which are these curly strings on the stem, start to dry and turn brown. And when they start to slip from there, then it's ripe, okay? The most important thing is do not wait for the melons to separate from the vine on their own. You ought to be checking those because if they're slipping on their own, within probably a very short time, that particular muskmelon cantaloupe is probably just ruptured and blown up, because it's overripe. So sugar content will not increase after harvest, okay? That's all the sweeter they're going to get. And they don't last that long, but for about 1 to 2 weeks, it comes at 45 to 50 degrees. But boiling point during that 1 to 2 weeks, okay? Growing some peppers. Peppers just take a little different care, whatever else. Should be sown indoors about 8 weeks before planting. The thing is, hardening off plants, any vegetable, if you're going to grow it yourself or, or you buy it from a nursery or garden center, it's been growing in a very nice location. Put it out where it's exposed to a little wind, let it dry a little bit, maybe let it wilt before you're going to transplant it in the garden, just to harden it off, because plant this nice lush plant into the ground, into your garden, it's going to take a beating. So harden it off a little bit. That's a real important thing with any type of vegetable, especially peppers. Little thing to, with peppers or any other crop, just to support, there's some row covers that you can put over the top of the plants to protect them from low night temperatures. Talk a little bit about that as a floating row cover over the top of the plants. But The thing with peppers is these temperatures above 90 or night temperatures below 60 or above 70 could cause flower abortion. You come out there and you see all these tiny flowers from your peppers laying on the ground. Those temperature conditions have been there and they've just aborted their flowers. And so it leads to, poor production. And you can't do a whole lot about this, but that's kind of the reason that I shared that. But also, uneven soil moisture could lead to blossom end rot, which is the picture right here. So what you should do with your peppers is have some sort of natural mulch, I would recommend, so you don't have this uneven soil moisture. So the soil moisture stays consistent to avoid blossom end rot. Also, they're susceptible to sunburn if there isn't enough leaf surface there to cover the fruit and protect it from the hot sun. Growing squash, winter squash. It belongs to 3 different species there are, from acorn type, butternuts, and buttercups. Note the days to harvest on these particular squash. I mean, some of these longer season varieties will not quite make it in our area of west central Minnesota. So be aware of anything that's over 85 days to maturity is a little tough sometimes to grow. Again, like watermelons, can be seeded directly in the garden, but they need warm soils to germinate. Pick the late squash before a hard freeze. If you have a light frost and kills the vines, that's fine. But ideally, squash should be field cured in place for a week or 2 in a dry, sunny location, which is not always easy to do. And here's the perfect type of environment to store them in, a cool place, ideally around 55 degrees with some good air movement. So, and if you've grown squash before and tried to store them, you're always going to get a few rotten ones. Make sure you're checking the squash and throw out the bad ones. Okay. Some common squash problems, for fruit set, in the early season because of the cold or wet weather we might have. And the one problem that I've experienced with growing vine crops is the striped cucumber beetle. The vine crops, they're most susceptible to this striped cucumber beetle. I'll show you a picture of it in a second here. But during the first and third leaf stages. And so watch your plants, your vine crops during that time period for the striped cucumber beetle. And this is what it looks like right here. It's a ferocious thing, and it's most detrimental to your plants during the early part of the growing season, but it's important to, if you don't need to treat your vine crops later, because in the summer, as they do very little damage or no damage to the plants if you still notice. It's during the early season that these things can be really bad. So, but the chemical that can be used to control these is called permethrin, and is directly extracted from a plant, from a marigold plant. And so it's considered non-toxic to humans, and it's perfused as an organic type of control for striped cucumber beetle. So a method to control that. 5 minutes over, but if you have any, if you stay around, I can answer some questions. My email address is on that last slide. You can email me a question at any time about vegetables or whatnot. If you're interested in some of these brochures, this is a great resource. If you're traveling around the state for all of the places, there's over 1,000 listings of farms and whatever that grow many different crops. I talked a little bit about bees and pollinators. There's a great resource here for you to follow some best management practices for your yards and gardens for all these pollinators.